Wow, I am so thrilled and delighted and so happy and really excited to welcome everyone. What a fantastic day today. Again, good morning. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's a beautiful New York morning. The river is amazing. And it's just beautiful today. And my name is Janet C. Salazar. I am the chairman of the Foundation for the Support of the United Nations. On behalf of our group and, of course, the GlobalMindED team, our partners and sponsors, welcome to the second annual conference. It's a global summit put together for and on behalf of and by GlobalMindED. And we're here together to really not just celebrate our next-gen students and pave the way for them to be able to have these opportunities that otherwise are hard for them and challenging for them to have. But at the same time, really, at the end of this conference, the goal is that if you are one of those able to open your resources, provide opportunities and open doors so that we can really line up thousands of our future leaders from the underserved communities, that would be amazing. And I have so much in my heart that I wanted to share today because I'm just really grateful to be here with all of you, grateful for GlobalMindED and Carol, who's a dear friend that I've been supporting through my foundation. I believe so much in the mission of GlobalMindED, and so does my team. And we are in this for life to support Carol and GlobalMindED. I am so proud of what they've accomplished for almost 10 years now. We're going on 11 years, congratulations. And that would not be possible, of course, without not just the leadership of Carol, but also the team like Celeste and Kim and Paula and everybody else, but also our funders and sponsors, which is very important. And we want to grow that. And today would be an opportunity for those of you who would then find out about the mission and what solid results GlobalMindED has achieved. I would love for you to think twice after this event to see if you can help, sponsor and partner with GlobalMindED. For those of you who were here last year, welcome back. This is our home when we are in New York at the United Nations Delegates Dining Room. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome, and we're thrilled that you're here with us. I will be introducing Carol Carter now, who is the muse of GlobalMindED, the founder and CEO, who's here. And she'll tell us more about the agenda for today and what it means to found and lead GlobalMindED, which is really making a lot of difference and impact on our younger generation's lives and really lining up the pipeline for a future generation of diverse and inclusive leaders. So again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Janet. Good morning. We are so excited that everyone here is in the room. And our theme today is Brave Solutions, Fueling Our Economic Future. And if you are in this room today, it's because somebody saw something really special in you and thought you needed to be here at this event, which is for the leaders of GlobalMindED's leaders. We have a big event every June, 11 or 1,200 people, maybe 400 students. But this is for people who work with us and new partners and people who we really want to be able to support the populations that those folks serve. So I just want to say on behalf of our team, our executive leaders, some of you were at a reception last night. Joan Hornig chairs our Executive Leadership Council. We want to welcome all of you to this, and for each and every one of you to know, especially a lot of the students among us, that you're here for a really important purpose at a really important time in our history, in the history of our nation, in the history of our world. And we hope our goals for today is that you can feel you really are exposed to some incredibly bright, talented, and capable people who are solving some of the most difficult and vexing issues of our time. And we're very grateful for the people on the program that they made time to be able to be with us today for that. So for those of you who aren't familiar, if somebody brought you today, GlobalMindED works to create a capable and diverse talent pipeline by getting more women, people of color, people who are not from zip codes of privilege, connected to role models, mentors, internships, and jobs. And we do that through events, special events like this, our big event in Denver every June. And then we have some programs that we do with some of our college partners. We also have a newsletter that's read by more than 100,000 a day. And if you all want to really inspire your college freshmen and have them write amazing things in their freshman composition class, it's a free newsletter. I'm just going to put a plug in. It's life-changing, and it has extremely high open rates because we profile people like the people in this room. And I just want to give a very brief shout out, and then we're going to start. But Donna was here last year, and she was a VP at CSU Pueblo, and you just need to stand up, Donna. And I said, you know you're going to be among the presidents someday. And look how fast it happened, because this summer, she became president of Fitchburg State. So I just want to shout that out, because GlobalMindED is not just making connections among students. We're making connections among leaders of leaders and people like you, and that's improving the world for all of us. So we'll have a little bit more time later for some additional insights, but I want to be able to bring Dr. Lynn Gangone up to the stage and her incredible panel that we're going to start with. And come on up, Lynn. We'll have some more time throughout the day for you all to learn a little bit more about us, but we are going to make sure we're staying on time as we get launched. So this is the wonderful Lynn, who we are connected through many circles, and I will have her share a little bit more about herself, because she's starting a fabulous new chapter, and we are hoping to be we're hoping to have some coverage in that new chapter. So let's give Lynn a big round of applause.
I thought it was safer for Carol to come down first because she has higher heels on than I do. Good morning, everyone. This is such a beautiful venue and such a wonderful opportunity. Last night I got to meet many of the students who are here. You have our hearts and our commitment to support you in all of the ways that you will make your way through to one day be standing here and introducing an esteemed panel. So I would love to invite the panelists to please come up and have a seat. You guys get the comfy chairs. I will stand here and pepper you with questions.
Let's give them a round of applause.
Again, students, imagine you sitting here, because you will someday. And it's very important, I believe, for you to see what you can be. And so here we have a panel of esteemed higher education leaders. Scott Pulsipher, to my immediate left, is the president of Western Governors University. Following, Dr. Lynn Pasquerella, who is president of AAC&U, the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Then the new president of AGB, the Association of Governing Boards, which is the group that represents the boards of trustees of colleges and universities around the country. I want you to be introduced to Fram Virjee. Then we have Charles Chuck Welch, who is president of AASCU, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, which represents the comprehensive state colleges and universities around the country, many of whom are students are first generation, And then I always call him Secretary King because I remember back in the day when he was the Secretary of Education for the U.S. He is now Chancellor of the State University of New York system. I'm a SUNY Albany alma mater, so, just happy to have you here, John King. And we will get started. So first, a round of applause for our panelists. So the format is that I will ask each of our panelists a question for them to respond to. That's sort of the classic panel conversation. And then we will move from that to a conversation because each of these individuals has a unique perspective on the work of reinventing education as a workforce engine. So first, John, your dedication as an education leader, in my opinion, is unparalleled. Currently, you lead a university system, so the State Universities of New York, which is a very complex system of four-year and community colleges, and also led in government, as I mentioned earlier, public policy and, again, higher education. So, John, what are three of the greatest workforce challenges and opportunities you see in your current students and your alumni? That's one question. And then a second question is, how are the New York State presidents and their teams addressing these challenges and opportunities?
Sure, thanks. And it's great to be with everyone this morning, and thank you, Carol, for bringing us all together. To give some context, SUNY has 64 campuses across New York State. 95% of New Yorkers live within 30 miles of a SUNY campus. And we have the full range of institutions, community colleges, four-year colleges, research institutions. And so we really like to say that there's a place for every New Yorker at SUNY, that we can meet any post-secondary need that someone has. And so I'll talk about three challenges and some of the things we're doing to address them. One is we want to make sure that every SUNY undergraduate has an internship or work-based learning experience. And so that's a big project because we've got 370,000 students in degree programs. And so we are working to make sure that all of our students have those paid internship experiences, right? Because one of the challenges is internships in many contexts are only available to affluent students who can afford to do them for free. But if you want equitable access to internships, they have to be paid. And so we've been able to dedicate $14.5 million in recurring state funding to expanding internships on each of our campuses. I see Alberto Cadere, president from SUNY Oneonta here. SUNY Oneonta students this year are doing internships that are paid because of that resource that we were able to invest. We've also launched a Climate Corps internship, placing students with our state agencies that work on climate and environmental issues. We've launched an Empire State Service Corps, 500 SUNY students this year who will be doing paid public service work, 300 hours a year of public service in the community, tutoring, addressing food and housing insecurity, getting paid and also getting the AmeriCorps Education Award to help them with the cost of college. So we are rapidly trying to grow those work-based learning opportunities for our students. We're trying to meet that challenge. A second challenge is the obstacles that get in the way for students, particularly our adult learners, things like food insecurity, housing insecurity, financial challenges, challenges with transportation, challenges with childcare. 1 in 5 college students are parents. And childcare can be a huge obstacle to student success, particularly at our 30 community colleges. And so we are investing in addressing those issues, growing the number of childcare slots available on our campuses, providing additional financial aid to our students. The state recently changed our financial aid formula so that you can get financial aid for non-credit workforce development programs. So you get started on your education, and then those programs can be converted into credit so you can move towards a degree. We're trying to help families enroll in the SNAP program, the Federal Food Assistance Program. So we are working to try to remove those barriers that so often get in the way. And the third challenge I'd mention, I hope this will be a subject of the discussion throughout, is the issue of equity. I was meeting with a Fortune 500 CEO yesterday who made the point that she cannot afford to leave any talent on the sidelines. For her company to be successful, she's got to draw talent from every community, and context. And so we are very focused on that at SUNY. We've been able to dedicate recurring investment, $10 million, to increasing supports for students with disabilities across our campuses, because that's a population that often gets left on the sidelines. We've launched an internship program for veteran students to work in our student recruitment and student affairs offices, because veterans too often struggle with the transition back to civilian life. We are working with the College Board using their landscape tool to make sure that we are recruiting and admitting students from communities where there are high degrees of adversity. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that SUNY reflects the full diversity of New York in our student body, in our faculty, and in our leadership.
That's terrific, the wraparound services, and also the way that you and your presidents are able to see the whole student and all of those students' needs, from housing and childcare all the way up through completing a degree, is really exceptional. I'm a proud alumna of the SUNY system, so thank you, John, for that. I'm going to move to the other Lynn, Lynn Pasquerella. So Lynn runs an association that has taken really the notion of liberal arts and created the capacity for all of us to understand the importance of liberal arts and the way that liberal arts do translate into workforce-ready graduates. So AAC&U has been a terrific leader in higher education and representing a critical sector. So Lynn, as you are working with your presidents and the institutions, how do you foster the support for workforce-ready graduates? And really importantly, what role do faculty play in assisting students who can make these strong personal connections?
Such good questions. Thank you. The work that we're doing here today is so important to me personally and professionally, both in my role as president of an association whose mission it is to advance the democratic purposes of higher education by promoting equity, innovation, and excellence in liberal education in a way that recognizes our nation's historic mission of educating for democracy and the need to prepare students for success in work, citizenship, and life. And personally, because I was a direct beneficiary of a program that was designed to help individuals succeed in work through higher education. The summer I graduated from high school, I managed to escape the factory work I did alongside my mother the previous summer, only because I was a beneficiary of CETA funds, the Comprehensive Employment Training Act. Those funds were reserved for students at the lowest socioeconomic rungs who were thought of being at risk of permanent unemployability. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. My mother got married at 16 at a time when you couldn't be married and be in high school. And my father joined the war effort after Pearl Harbor Day at the age of 16. My mother ended up as a single parent, and I was a caregiver for her, and so attended a local community college under Pell Grants, Perkins Loans, and the CETA funds. And then transferred to Mount Holyoke 2 years later, and then went off to Brown to get my PhD. And when I graduated, I vowed that I would never forget the lessons that were learned in that transition from community college to the Ivy League, and have spent my career dedicated to access to excellence regardless of socioeconomic background, to the centrality of liberal education, and to political scientist Benjamin Barber's notion of colleges and universities as civic missions, where we not only educate people to be free, but we free them to be educable by serving as a visible force in the lives of those who have been most underserved. I think in looking at how we are preparing students today, we need to consider it against the backdrop of American higher education. Over the past several years, public confidence in higher education has reached a new low. In 2017, it was at 56%. Now it's down to 36%. There's increasing skepticism around the value of a college degree and widespread concern that higher education is too expensive, too difficult to access, and doesn't teach people 21st century skills. That's accompanied by a false narrative that has arisen in this increasingly polarized society that our campuses are bastions of liberal progressivism intent on brainwashing the next generation of snowflakes who are going to melt at the slightest abrasion of their sensibilities. So we have a lot of work to do in rewriting that narrative, but also restoring public trust in the promise of higher education in general and liberal education in particular. We at AAC&U do employer surveys every few years. We've done them since 2006. And we know that work and education must be integrated. For a long time, the notion of higher education was existing within an ivory tower as a willful disconnect from the practical matters of everyday life. But a liberal education for today means incorporating workforce preparation into that education throughout the curriculum from the first to final semester. Our surveys show that employers are looking for college graduates who can write, speak, and think with precision, coherence, and clarity, work on diverse teams, engage in moral imagination, and have the technological capacity, they have technological literacy in ways that help them discern the truth in this post-truth era. Consider the ethical implications, social implications of the use of technology that's often emerging more rapidly than consideration about these consequences. And they also want a certain set of mindsets and dispositions. Employers are concerned that our graduates are bored too easily, want rapid advancement, aren't willing to engage in long-haul projects when it's now needed more than ever. So we have to think about the ways in which we can prepare students to gain those skills, competencies, and dispositions. That will mean moving away from standardized tests and instead engaging students in unscripted problems. So for far too long, we've asked students to answer questions for which we already know the answers. We need applied integrative learning on problems that matter to the student and to society. We know from recent survey research that mental health, anxiety, despair, depression have now surpassed financial considerations as the primary reason students are dropping out of college or not attending in the first place. We need to address the psychosocial concerns, what we've heard about in terms of reduced cognitive bandwidth as a result of food, shelter, insecurity, racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, and find ways to restore that cognitive bandwidth through pedagogies of kindness. And that has to be done by giving students opportunities in the classroom to be prepared for work. And so when I was president of Mount Holyoke College, we developed a program that provided paid internships for each of our students, knowing that without that, we would continue to have the equity gaps and this growing racial and economic segregation in higher education. With respect to AI, a recent survey has shown that only 55% of college graduates say that they were exposed to AI and preparing for a workforce that incorporates AI in their curriculum. And yet 93% of employers say that over the next 5 years, they expect their employees will use AI. So we have to address the needs of society in that way. So that's some of what we're doing at AAC&U, is really offering institutes for faculty, for students, and for staff on how to prepare students for the workforce. In order to do this, we have to have a cultural shift in which we upend what we value in the academy. We give tenure and promotion based on peer-reviewed journal articles and grants received, but not on the ways in which faculty engage with students inside and outside of the classroom. And I mentioned the statistics on mental health. The SERP study out of California shows that almost all students go to college to get a better job. So 87.9%, the highest number ever. And yet increasingly, students don't just want a job, they want careers that have meaning and purpose. And studies out of Gallup and Bates have shown that the best way for students to find meaning and purpose is to have close connections with faculty in and outside of the classroom, to have faculty members who care about them as persons, and to engage in those applied learning projects. So we have to reward that in the academy and find ways that we can align a sense of meaning and purpose with the career preparation that we're offering students through our courses.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. There are so many things that you talked about that are just emerging between what John has said and what you've said about themes that we need to kind of unpack as we move through the panel. Democracy, certainly one of them, and I always say the personal is the professional, so sharing your story. The students in the room, the experiences we had that you are currently having are the things that have informed the passion that we have to give back and to be in education. And so, Lynn, I thought that your personal narrative was quite compelling, so thank you. But speaking of democracy and democratization, Scott, I always think of WGU as one of the places that truly has democratized education in terms of the depth and breadth of the work that WGU does in the ways in which you've opened up online learning, and you're known for this nationally and internationally. Can you talk a little bit about the results that you've had and how more of us can support students we serve to graduate into great jobs and leadership roles to experience financial as well as personal success? We're sharing the mic.
Lynn, I'm glad I don't have your job. That sounds like way too many problems to solve. I think just by way of a little background, the university that I'm the president of was actually named Western Governors University because 19 governors of Western states actually founded it. I like to start with this simple question is like, why do you think governors of states that already had their public institutions founded a new nonprofit university? Maybe they thought that their public systems weren't actually serving all of their citizens and residents of their respective states. That in fact, so much of the design was in fact not fulfilling the primary purpose that they saw of education, which is being a catalyst for people to change their lives for the better. Being an engine of the economy, meaning aligning education with the opportunities and the work. I think that's one of the simple things that we started with was that education wasn't an end in and of itself. It was actually a means to an end. It was a means for someone to actually live a self-determined life, a means by which they could acquire the knowledge, skill, and ability they need to actually telegraph themselves into opportunity. And so it started with this simple premise that, first and foremost, why don't you design and develop curriculum that's directly relevant to the opportunities they want to pursue? To Lynn's point, that if the vast majority of individuals saw college or education as a pathway to opportunity, then you have to design it so that it's actually relevant to it. The second thing you have to actually do is you have to make it the investment or the total cost of actually pursuing that education was going to be worth it. Lynn didn't talk about this, but she referenced it, is that today the average cost to complete a bachelor's degree in the U.S. is $100,000. There is a declining number of opportunities to which a $100,000 investment is worth it, such that you see a decline in the interest of the rising population of individuals to sit there and say, is actually college the pathway that I want to pursue? So you knew you had to make it more affordable and more accessible. The third key thing you had to focus on is you had to make it traversable, meaning completable by all the individuals for whom traditional design of college was not accessible, was not actually attainable, was not even, they couldn't fit it into their already busy lives. As amazing as it is to have 95% of your population live within 30 miles of a campus, like the fact that you even have to go to a campus is a barrier. And so you have the vast majority of individuals in the US that do not have the time and proximity to go sit in a classroom on a set schedule to meet it 3 times a week at the professor's leisure, et cetera. Like, this is not actually something that fits into the busy lives of working adults. So considering those things, it's like we then design and develop programs that are directly relevant to the work. That's in health, in education, in business, and in technology. All of our bachelor's and master's degrees are directly relevant to the high demand fields that exist in the workforce. The second key thing that we did is we rethought the instructional and learning journey. So we actually disaggregated the faculty model. We obsess about teaching, not research. But that also meant that we had to have a different role, which is not only do you have to teach, you actually have to mentor. Lynn highlighted this fact that like so many of the disruptions that individuals actually have that cause them to actually stop out have less to do with their capacity for learning. They often have to do with disruptions that occurred in their lives, sometimes an acute financial barrier, distress, et cetera. Sometimes it's an emotional challenge that they're dealing with, et cetera. Well, enter the role of a mentor. You know, most institutions invest in a mentor at about 1,000 students to an advisor. We have about 80 students to a mentor. And so every student that we have has a mentor from the day they start to the day they complete. The other thing was we separated teaching from evaluation. We focus on a competency-based model. It's not how much time you spend in a seat, it's actually whether or not you're proficient in the skills and the knowledge that you actually that you have to demonstrate. So having done all of that, what WGU is doing today is that with individuals, that 75% come from one or more underserved backgrounds, 35% are from underrepresented races and minorities, specifically Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, or two or more races. 25% are from low-income households, meaning under $35,000 in income per family, and 45% are Pell eligible, 16% are rural, 15% are military, 45% are first-generation students. This is a very diverse and underrepresented population in traditional higher education, and yet with them, we're achieving now 55+% completion rates. If you think that's low, for an individual of color from a low-income background, their completion rate at 8 years is 25%. At 8 years. And our graduates, on average, finish in 2.5 years. And we're helping them complete at 55+%. Now, more importantly, the employers, 98% of them are hiring WGU graduates again. 95% of them say they're ready for the jobs. You know, they have twice the rate of engagement at work compared to graduates across the sector. Their income gains within 4 years are $30,000 more per year than what they were earning at the time they started school. That's not twice. Average nationally is about $20,000. Our graduates are earning $30,000 more within 4 years of graduation. You see overall well-being among our graduates is across all 5 dimensions of well-being, and Gallup studies show that our graduates are doing twice as good across all 5 dimensions of well-being versus graduates nationally. You can actually design a model that in fact is oriented around how do you fit education to the already busy lives of the working adults. How do you also make sure that those pathways are relevant to the jobs and the work so that in fact they get an economic value add as well as they're ready for the jobs they're doing everything else. I'll leave you just with one last kind of stat on this is that if you actually answer the question that your education is worth the cost, you're 7 times more likely to recommend your friends and colleagues to the university that you attended, your alma mater. At WGU, our graduates have a 74 net promoter score. That 70% of our students are recommended and referred by our alumni, our current employees, their employers, and community college partners that we have. The vast majority of the students that are coming to WGU have been referred. We now serve currently about 180,000 students, and we graduated over 50,000 this last year. So that's where WGU is 25 years later.
Well, that's an incredible story, and I love that you brought up the competency-based piece because that has been, we're seeing that competency-based, so not credit hour-based, right, but how you move through a set of knowledge and skills and attributes that move you through your degree very differently than credit hours. So thank you for talking about all of the ways that WGU has been as innovative as it's been. So you're getting a really good sense of the landscape of higher education, right? In the United States, we don't have a system of higher ed like they have in other countries. So what you're seeing is the diversity of institutional types and systems. So we've talked about online, we've talked about competency-based, credit hour-based, community colleges, research-intensive, private or independent colleges. You've seen this whole landscape, and now I want to turn to Charles, who runs the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. So typically, those comprehensive colleges, those regional institutions that have a history of being normal schools, which was the development of teacher education in the country, but have expanded since to be incredibly diverse institutions serving local communities. So, Charles, and you're also, as many of us have talked about, a first-generation college student, and that so much informs the work that many of us do. But you recognize, because of your experience, and both personally and professionally, you recognize the importance of fostering college degree recipients with the needs of their local workforce. So if you could please share with the group what innovations are AASCU presidents leading to become workforce engines in both urban and especially rural areas, which is incredibly important, and why are those institutions so important to educating their communities?
Well, let me start by saying, Carol, if you ask me to do this next year, it's going to be on the condition I get to go first, because
we're okay. We've got time.
I would agree everything that's been said. I mean, and I think we're all on the same page with that. You know, what's interesting, Lynn, to your question is I probably wouldn't use the word innovation as much as I would just say it's who we are. It's what we do as institutions. I'll never forget when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came out with the Post-Secondary Value Commission, and they had an action agenda of items that needed to happen. And we got together as a group at AASCU to talk about what do we need to do. And then we quickly realized we don't need to do anything. We need to keep doing what we're already doing, because many of the recommendations that were in that report were things that we do as a normal course of business because of the institutions that we represent. AASCU represents, as you said, the regional public university sector, 517 campuses across the country, 5 million students. About half of our students are students of color. A very large percentage of our students are first generation. A very large percentage of our students are low-income Pell recipients. We produce 68% of all public baccalaureate degrees in the United States, 69% of all public master's degrees, and upwards of 80% of teacher education, business, and health professions degrees. So we are the institutions that are driving what is happening across the country in our local communities. One of the things we take very seriously is something we call Stewards of Place. We did a report 20 years ago. We recently updated that. And Stewards of Place is our commitment to ensuring that we represent, we reflect, and we serve the communities in which we are located and the regions in which we are located. You can see that in our students. The vast majority of our students come from the region. They come there, they plan to stay there, they plan to work there, they plan to raise their families there. Many of our faculty members and staff members come from those communities. They are deeply invested in the communities and the work that we do. And you know, when we think about sort of what is the role of higher education, and it really depends on who you ask. And John kind of mentioned this a little bit. Lynn certainly talked about it as well. If you ask some, they would say, oh, it's directly to teach workforce skills. If you ask business and industry, Lynn, to your point, you get a different answer quite frequently. What we hear from many business and industry partners are, you know, we're going to teach them the skills the way that we want to teach it for our specific industry. We want thinkers, we want writers, we want communicators, we want problem solvers, we want individuals that can work as teams. And so it takes that combination of the traditional liberal arts as well as workforce education. And so what many of our campuses are doing is finding the best ways to embed the technologies of the day and the workforce skills into the traditional humanities and liberal arts to ensure that we have that well-rounded student that can immediately go to work, but that can also pivot 10 years down the road when that job is no longer relevant and they have to go into another field and have that ability to be able to do that. Our campuses, I'm amazed at how in tune they are with their local communities. They truly understand what the needs are from a social standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a workforce standpoint, and they're able to pivot. I love when somebody says to me, aren't you concerned about the regional publics in this thing and their future sustainability? And I say, to the contrary, because higher education as an industry must change. And I feel like our institutions are best in the best position to make that change because we are more nimble, because we are more in touch with what's happening in our communities, and because we do represent those students. It's interesting. I had to have a conversation with a colleague recently because he was talking about regional public universities and research universities. And I said, well, we are doing research at our regional public universities, right? It's applied research. It's the research that students are actually getting in there and getting to work on the things that are happening in the local employers of their region. They're getting to do research in areas that are absolutely going to have monumental impact on the economy of the future of the region in which they live. And that's so incredibly important. We actually are a beneficiary of lots of private funding from funders around the country who believe deeply in trying to transform higher education. And they know that our institutions are the ones that are going to be able to serve those students and are really the most closely connected to those communities. We like to say we are the social and economic engines of the communities that we serve. And one of the grant programs that we are currently working on from a private funder is on career services. And it's about career coaching and getting students engaged in that career mindset at the beginning of their college experience. Unfortunately, yes, we have too many career services offices that a student shows up when they're a senior and says, help me write a resume, right? We want to get that started earlier on for those that can help learn what the possibilities are, where they can go, what they can do. Well, typically when we put out a call for these grant programs, we get the grant money from the funder. We send out to our campuses, hey, we've got this opportunity. Let us know if you're interested, and we'll try. We could possibly give you some funding to do some innovative approaches on your campus. When we got this one, we were talking about it in our executive leadership team, and one of our vice presidents said, we've got a quick turnaround, like 5 days. We got to put out this call to the campuses, and then we've got to determine, who might be best suited to receive this funding. And I'm new to the position. I said, well, what if we get 50 or 100 recipients? She said, oh, we won't get that many. We might get 10 to 20. 67 in a 2-day period. The most we've ever gotten. So what that says is our campuses are in tune with the importance of ensuring our students know the opportunities that exist, the jobs that are there, and how to get best prepared for those jobs. We have some wonderful examples. Metropolitan State in Denver is doing a career readiness program where they're embedding career readiness as a concept in all of their curriculum, in all of their activities to ensure that everything is focused on students being career ready. Now, that does not mean for one specific particular job. It means being ready to be in the workforce. Or East Tennessee State University, I love a program they have called the Blue Sky Institute. They partnered with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, who always had at least 50 jobs available, always, sometimes more. And they worked up a specific curriculum within computer science with internships and job-embedded experiences and a guaranteed job offer when the student graduates, right? Those are the kinds of things that, because of the relationships we have, because we are local, because we are regional. And then I think the thing that we're doing to really try to help is to squash some of this anti-higher education discussion that's out there. Lynn, you mentioned this earlier about, is it worth it anymore? Is the value there anymore? And talking about, and the other, Lynn, you mentioned sort of the diversity, right? One of the things that I say every time I talk to a federal policymaker, every time I talk to a media of the member is higher education is not a one-size-fits-all enterprise.
Amen.
Right? A national media outlet had a headline that said, this was back several months ago, that said higher education hits the $100,000 tuition mark. I picked up the phone, I called that editor, and I said, higher ed didn't hit the $100,000 mark, Vanderbilt did in one program. You can go for 10 years at a regional public university and not spend $100,000 in tuition, all right? It's different, yeah, I think that deserves it. Those are all my presidents out there saying, preach, right?
Preach.
But we have to talk about that. When we go and talk to policymakers and say all the things that you hate, the things about high costs, the things about student loan debt, the things about maybe some of the social issues that are happening with the encampments, that's largely not happening at our campuses. You know why? Because the students that come to our institutions come there to have a better life, to get a job, to be able to raise up their families and do things the rest of their family members never dreamed imaginable, just like mine, right? And so I think it's important that we have those conversations to talk about who we are and what we do, or maybe conversely, who we aren't. Because we're not always these ivory-towered institutions that are out of touch and irrelevant and antiquated and not in line. To the contrary, our institutions are, it's what we're focused on, we know it's what's important, and we're going to make sure we do everything we can to ensure that our students have that life that they dream about and the whole reason they came in the first place.
Chuck, I feel like I'm at a pep rally right now for all the state colleges and universities. I love the depth and breadth of what you've just described. It also reminded me about some of the diversity in the institutions that we need to also mention. We have the president of the Muskogee Nation here, and so we have our tribal colleges represented. We have our HBCUs in the house, and they have such a rich history of supporting the African American and Black communities. We have, you mentioned Metropolitan State University of Denver. I'm from Denver, and so that's a Hispanic serving institution. And then we have women's colleges. I mean, Lynn was president of Mount Holyoke, and women's colleges have also had a rich tradition in our country. So, Charles, thank you for reminding all of us of the work of these incredible institutions and also of the diversity of higher education. I've always dreamt that, you know, any student can find a home in U.S. higher education, and certainly you've described that quite well. Fram, I don't know if it's because you're the most newly hired Higher Education Association executive that you've gotten to go last, but I'm going to have you close us out. So let me just tell you a little bit about Fram first. He's a first-generation, poverty-affected college student. He became a successful lawyer and thankfully did not, I'm teasing the lawyers in the room, did not go on to practice law necessarily, but entered higher education administration, for which we are grateful, rose to a state college president, and now leading the Association of Governing Boards. How are you at AGB encouraging these boards, right, that sometimes don't necessarily reflect the diversity or experiences of our students, although that is changing, but let's just sort of hold that space right now. How do you help them think about selecting perhaps a different kind of leader to lead our colleges and universities? What do you think trustees need to know about now versus in the past? And finally, but related, what will you, AGB, be looking for in today's boards and presidents who will lead higher education as a workforce engine? Not simple questions, but I know that you're ready to answer them. So, Fram, please.
Well, first of all, the idea that higher education is under attack and the value proposition should have already been answered right now by listening to the other panelists. This is the problem is we're speaking to the choir, and we need to be sharing this information more broadly. But the good news is that if you look at what universities are doing across the country, every slice of them, whether it's online universities or public regional universities, metropolitan in the city universities, or in the rural universities, they are moving with the times, looking at the issues of workforce development and what our communities need, and meeting our students where they find them in order to give them the opportunities that they need. So that's the good news. That's really, really good news. Mm-hmm. And the not so good news is if there's an area in higher education that needs to catch up with that, it's most often our governing boards. Traditionally, governing boards of universities are filled with individuals that don't know a whole lot about higher education. They're filled with government appointees appointed by the governor or the legislature in the public sector, or they are filled with wonderfully dedicated alumni who love their universities but don't know a lot about how universities work. And traditionally what governing boards did was show up, approve the minutes, go through the processes of listening to what was happening at the university and then attend the after party. I'm just being honest. And so today, we have, in order to move institutions forward, we have to change the way in which our governing boards act and who are on our governing boards. Gone are the days where you can have that kind of a board. What you need instead is a board that actually reflects the university that it is seeking to guide. I believe, and I don't think this is an understatement, that a success of a university rises and falls with the success of its governing board. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've seen too many universities fail because their governing board didn't pay attention to what was happening to that university, didn't catch up in time. You know, I get this question asked all the time. How is it that this university failed financially when its governing board is filled with business people who should understand and see the warning signs for what's happening with this university? That's because they don't understand higher educational finance. So what are we looking for at AGB? What are we trying to encourage our 40,000 members and our 2,000 institutional members to do in selecting their governing boards? Number one, find governing boards with a mix of skills that actually reflect what the university is doing, what its mission and vision entail that it should be, and how to promote that going forward. That means that governing board has to understand who its students are, not who those students were that they went to school with, in my case 30, 40 years ago, but who they are today. They need to understand and share their students' life experiences, where their students are coming from, that many of their students are working 1, 2, or 3 jobs in order to go to the university, that they come from underserved communities, that they come from families that are multi-generational in the home, that they have mental health needs, transportation needs, food insecurity, housing insecurity. Those are things that didn't necessarily rise to the surface when these governing board were going to school. But they also should reflect the students demographically. The students should be able to see themselves in the governing board. They should be able to see the opportunities for them to actually become trustees into the future and help guide their institutions. So that's the first thing. We're looking for a mix of skills, a complexity of the governing board that actually reflects the complexity of the university. Second, rather than just making sure that the trains are running on time at the university, that the bills are being paid, the governing board's job is to think strategically into the future. Today, I think our universities are leading our governing boards into the future rather than the governing boards leading those universities into the future. And I think that has to change. The boards have to catch up and actually lead and think strategically into the future. That means preparing these governing boards, and this is what AGB is all about, for that future. Through orientation, through discussions of what our communities need. What is the business community looking for? And you've heard a lot about that. It's not just we're looking for someone with a particular degree. We're looking for a graduate with a suite of skills that involves communication, emotional intelligence, understanding of the community, a desire to build in the community that they live in, a stick-to-itiveness for that community into the future. And along with the skills for the jobs of tomorrow. I think a lot of our governing board members today don't even understand AI. and they need to be part of that discussion. They need to understand that there are new ways to deliver education, stackable credentials, hybrid learning, the use of AI as a positive thing rather than something that the institution should be dragged into kicking and screaming. And so preparing the governing board to be part of that process. And then an accountability system. Governing boards need to hold themselves accountable and their institution accountable for where it's going to go into the future. Using metrics, using measurements of not just are we matriculating the right number of students, but actually are we graduating them? And when they're graduating, what are they doing? Where are they going? Universities need to pay attention to that and keep track of where their alumni are 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and measuring are we preparing those students for the jobs of the future? So I think that is what AGB is about, bringing our governing boards into the 21st century as leaders of these institutions.
You have a very big challenge, but a very doable challenge. I certainly think that it would be wonderful to have this panel in front of your boards of trustees. Let's do that. Maybe we could do that because, you know, from John all the way through to you, Fram, I mean, each of you have hit on the essential ways that higher education and workforce development are linked, have hit on how we deliver education to a complex student body. You're absolutely right. My experience as a first-generation college student is candidly very different than your experience as a first-generation college student. And we can claim that notion that we were the first, but what you're experiencing as students today is far different than what we experienced. And so understanding that and being able to lead trustees who are in fact the leaders of the institutions into that space, maybe this is one way, Carol Carter, we can do that. We have actually come up to time, and I know Carol is a stickler for starting on time, staying on time. So what I want to do is to personally thank each one of you. We are so blessed, to use a term I heard earlier, to be able to be of service to education and to be able to lead in the ways that each of us have led to move forward into the future, understanding what we know today is not necessarily, as I think Charles said, we are doing the work now, but we also, higher education does need to change. And I believe that under your leadership, we are in incredibly good hands. And I know each of you are lifting as you climb, bringing up younger professionals into the work. I want some of you students in the room to think about being in higher education as a career. It is a fabulous way of giving back. And so thanks to each one of you. Thank you to GlobalMindED for having us be the opening panel. Thank you, Carol Carter, for your leadership. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of the day. And as the first panel, the rest of you all need to be as good as we were.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. That was fabulous. Thank you so much. And I just want to say, you know, Fram, one more thing. You can walk off the stage and still listen to this. But one of the wonderful things about the GlobalMindED community is this idea of cross-pollination. And so it would be wonderful at AGB if we had this same panel, but it would also be wonderful at the AGB conference if we had some of the students who are in the room today. Some of them you're going to get to meet after lunch, because all of these different perspectives inform how we can be better and different about solving the toughest things that we face right now. So I just want to say, if anyone wants to brainstorm about their different conferences and cool things we can do, I hope today is a lot of fodder for new ways you can look at some of the things that you've traditionally done. All right, well, with that, we have a big treat in this next panel because it's about funding. And I will say, as somebody who was 17 years in corporate America, and then I started a company, and then I started GlobalMindED, the money has to start to move differently because there's not enough money flowing to some of the kinds of things that we really need to have funding for, like a lot of the students and the initiatives that the panel that was just here serves. And part of what we want to do today is look at how funders can be different and better and more aware of people who aren't at their tables. And that means a lot of different kinds of perspectives. So it's my pleasure to introduce this next panel. And then I have to tell a little tiny story about Alison Pendergast because I'm so proud of her, and I know she won't share this herself. But Alison and I worked together when I was 26, not knowing what I was doing as a director of marketing at Prentice Hall. She was this incredible marketing manager. And then also there's a woman back here who's the highest ranking woman at Elsevier, Lori. You just got to stand up because I'm so proud of you too. She started as our assistant, first gen to college. Alison now runs the largest portfolio at the Bill and Melinda Gates Higher Education Foundation, $90 million portfolio on the top 20 gateway courses where most students struggle and drop out freshman year. So she had a meeting with Bill Gates last night, which is why she couldn't be at our dinner, but I am enormously proud to introduce Alison Pendergast, first gen to college, ROTC, Navy, veteran, served our country, and just tremendous human. And one of the things I also want to say to the students is, we're going to have time at lunch and the reception for you to meet these incredible people, and they are accessible to you, and that's why they're here today. So with that, I want to introduce Alison and welcome her panel of tremendous people to the stage.
Thank you so much, Carol. I'm very, very, very pleased to be here today, and thank you, Carol. You're such a force of nature, and it's been such a humbling experience over my life to know you and to be dear friends with you and to support your work. I want to make one small correction, though. It's Army ROTC, not Navy. We love our Navy. I am Army. My dad was a 50-year Navy man, and when I told him I was going into the Army, he wished me well. And but it has been a phenomenal opportunity for me to have gone through ROTC. I am a product of public higher education. Neither of my parents went to college, so the only opportunity I really had to fund my college education was to strap on combat boots and to join the military and to get that ROTC scholarship through the University of Connecticut. And I'm very, very proud of that service. And so it helped prepare me for the many opportunities that I subsequently had in my life. So that's also an opportunity for many other first gen. So I'm thrilled to introduce our panel today, and I want to welcome them to the stage. And just very quickly, let me introduce Lisette Nieves, who is president for the Fund for the City of New York. She'll come on stage, and I'll share a little bit more about Lisette's background as we get into the conversation about impact investing. Janet Salazar is also going to join our panel and talk a little bit about the work that she's doing through the Foundation for the Support of the United Nations. So welcome, Janet. And then also Maria Dayton. And Maria is the Senior Director of Capital Partnerships and Innovation for LG Nova. And welcome to the stage. And so the purpose of this panel is really to talk a little bit more about how we can move the capital and funding towards these initiatives that we all know are very valuable and critical to the work that we're trying to do. Again, a little background on myself. I'm Alison Pendergast. I'm with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation post-secondary team, and my work is really focused on improving college completion rates, very specifically for underserved and minority and first-generation students. And my work is focused in a very specific swim lane of what we call the gateway course completion rate. Everyone knows that there is a very high need to graduate more first-gen Black, Latino, and Indigenous students. But in order to do that, we have to improve the course completion rates along the way. First-year gateway courses are a blocker for many students. And so what we're working on at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are strategies to help more underserved and focused students to complete these first-year gateway courses with higher quality learning, better learning outcomes, and learning experiences that really set them up for success in and on their journey to their degrees. And so we're making, and we'll be announcing shortly, a very, very large investment to reimagine math education. And I think everyone knows that the foundation is very focused on the innovative use of technology. And so we're going to help colleges and institutions reimagine and re-envision the way math education is delivered to students so that we can have more students completing pre-calculus, calculus, college algebra, statistics, so these critical math courses that really set them on the pathway to degree success. So you'll be hearing more about that in the future, and I'm very, very excited about that work. So our panel today is going to explore impact investing in education, and specifically how those of you that are in the audience today that may have access to capital and are looking to put that capital to work, very specifically, how you can be more responsive and aware to the needs that are really on the ground and more responsive to trends such as these workforce needs that we've previously discussed, the impact and the influence of AI in education, as well as more directed in how you can make your own organizations more aware of the need to move capital differently and more courageous in equity-centered investing and equity-centered prioritization of the needs of our focused students and underserved students in these areas. So with that, I want to start with Janet, and I want to just quickly provide some context to what we mean by impact investing. Janet, why don't you take a few minutes to just share with the audience a little bit more about what you specifically are doing and give us a definition of impact investing.
Thank you. Happy to be here again. And hello, everyone. Janet Salazar. So the foundation is one of the hats that I wear that's supporting this. And my day job is with SGG Holdings Company. So it's a private company where I'm the chairman and founder. We do a lot of impact investing, specifically in healthcare innovation, education, and when we talk about healthcare innovation, it has a lot to do with mental health as well. So I want to talk more about that later because this is one of the really important topics right now that are affecting our younger generation to, what Lynn said earlier at the first panel. But impact investing, it's simply put for everyone to understand, especially our students, it's channeling money or capital, right, financing, whether that is private, public, philanthropic, VC, etc., into investable projects or vehicles or projects that are that has social impact or social effects that basically will make lives hopefully better for other people. And right now, the space is becoming also watered down in terms of the definition. And I'm sure my fellow speakers are, will talk about that later as well. But the most important aspect of the space when we say impact investing is the fact that now there are more and more awareness in terms of how money should be allocated, in these socially impactful projects. And with me and where I work with, that has a lot to do with private money, specifically in the family office space. And we'll talk more about this later, but as a member of one of the biggest family office clubs in the world, I can say that there is now a growing movement of the younger generation or the younger inheritors of this massive wealth of money in the trillions of dollars to really deviate from what their original ancestors or older generation, the way how the money have been used to now, with the inheritors who are younger and more aware and more socially conscious, there is that, again, massive movement that's going to happen where this money will be allocated, and I'm very positive and hopeful around it, and that's why I'm mentoring a lot of these inheritors right now, the new generation of money, to be able to really use that into socially impactful projects, specifically in the context of why we are here right now, education, right? Funding that, whether that's K-12 or higher education and other even non-formal or informal ways of educating our younger generation. So happy to talk more about that later, because there's a lot of trends, a lot of really important movements happening right now in the family office, where it gets easier compared to at least institutional, where you have to go through months, even years, just going through the process of getting that funding and money. In the philanthropic space, specifically for family offices, there's little, not little, I'm sorry, take that back. There's a lesser complication when it comes to really channeling that money. And I think that gives us a better hope for, what could be possible in really allocating a lot of money when it comes to supporting our educational initiatives. Thank you.
Very, very interesting. Let's thank you, and let's move on to Lisette. You are a tremendous Latino.
Hello.
You're a tremendous Latina leader, Truman Scholar, Rhodes Scholar, Aspen Fellow, Richard P. Nelson Public Policy Fellow, and you served in the Obama administration. Your work on the ground in New York City has provided over $1 billion in interest-free loans over the last 20 years, and you've provided back office support to 80 diverse nonprofits. In addition to these initiatives, how is the Fund for the City of New York further addressing how to close equity gaps in education, the environment, and the economy in this time of challenge, from housing to jobs?
Hi, thank you for that intro. And also thank you for setting the stage on what do we mean by impact investing. So thank you, Carol, for having me here. I would say one of the things the Fund for the City of New York does is look at it, let's go at the 30,000 square foot level. There's what we call an idea to implementation gap that happens. So you have social entrepreneurs, many of them may be in this room, who say, I know the change I want to see in an environment. The barriers to entry, we always think about with small businesses. We don't think about it with nonprofits. The tax filings that have to happen, the clearances through the Attorney General's office, you name it, the operational guidelines, the human resource guidelines, all those kinds of pieces. What we do is we provide the complete back office for at least 90 nonprofit organizations so that they can be ideas and impact forward while we manage these other pieces. And I will tell you that makes a huge difference in what we call the removal of barriers to that. As a result, our portfolio is much more diverse, much more impactful, does better at fundraising, because again, the idea that someone who has a great idea that they want to make changes in maybe water management in a local community, I'm just giving an example, or want to think about housing differently, particularly in New York City, the obstacles we expect can hinder that. The other part is we want to remove levels of risk for what I consider the most exciting entrepreneurs. So what do I mean by that? That means, wouldn't it be great to be able to try something out without the highest risk imaginable there? That is what we need in this space. And yet we only talk about it in small businesses, but I actually think in entrepreneurship here, particularly for the young folks who are here, but I also say some of the most successful social entrepreneurs who are in their 40s and 50s, this is a great way that they're able to do that. So that's one area that often doesn't get discussed. I think another area when we're thinking about impact through the Fund for the City of New York is why we do bridge financing or zero loan financing is because it's this piece called cash flow. And I think it's really hard to imagine for folks who, 1 in 6, think about it, 1 in 6 employees in New York are in a nonprofit, right? Nonprofits range from small to large institutions, right? Think about the variety of that. Cash flow is very real when you think about someone can call you up from a $300 million organization and say, We've been waiting for this grant, federal grant, state grant, you name it. How do we fill this gap? For some higher ed nonprofit institutions, they may have reserves, but that may not be the case for other nonprofit institutions. And so we are there to fill that gap in 48 hours. And we're really proud of that role, that we play that intermediary role. And I think the last thing I think about with the fund that I think is important too is the role that we play, particularly in providing what I call confidence funding, or any grant that we give from the fund is general operating support. They're smaller grants. They're super helpful to what I call for the ideation phase for these smaller organizations that are kind of blooming. And so we get the data. What we've realized is organizations that are between the $1 and probably $4 million. It's an interesting thing. If you're looking at for-profit, I call it around the Series B size, right? I mean, if you're thinking about the second round of financing, this group of nonprofits are the ones that often will go under because they don't have the support, right? They don't have the buzz of the beginning, but they need the continual support because they have the impact that can happen. So we're there for that group as well. So
Yeah.
that's what we fund.
That's really, really fascinating. And do you have a lot of collaboration activities between these organizations? So you fund the back office,
Yeah.
which takes a big lift off of their plates, just having to manage all of that.
Yeah.
Do you also provide this?
Oh, the most successful ones in our portfolio are collaborative by design. And I really say that. I think it's really hard to be successful in any of these fields with an imperial eye notion. It just doesn't work that way. I think a lot of new ideas that people are coming up with, particularly in the social entrepreneur space, are really thinking horizontal about challenges versus vertical about challenges. And as a result of that, they have to collaborate across these silos. So we definitely see that. We provide extra capacity building support for them to do that. Collaboration is not easy. Anybody here easy? Oh yeah, real easy, right? But I would say absolutely a necessity and should be what our values are based on. There's no way you can think about supporting a young child in a public school without also understanding that we are in the highest cost of living city, right? And understanding that organizations in our portfolio that also do a lot around housing equity and more affordable housing, how important those are as well to the families of these students. So we make sure that they communicate across those lines.
And last question on the fund is, how do you decide? You must get a lot of proposals. And how do you parse through the proposals, and how do you decide who gets into the portfolio?
Well, you know, we do our own Match.com, right? Or is that an ancient phrase? But I will, who would have thought that, right? 20 years ago, even saying things like that. I would say for us, not everybody wants to have their complete back office managed. They like the autonomy and separation. So it has to work for both. They have to be committed to improving the lives of those first in New York, but also beyond that, right? I think that's important. We have a commitment to New York. And it's literally a discussion and negotiation. We have a long wait list. We have to make sure we have the capacity to support them, to bring them on. But just in the last 4 years since I've been there, we've doubled in size. We've gone from 40 to close to more than doubled to 90 organizations now. So we know that's where there's enormous need, and we're excited to support that. It is not what I call the sexiest part of it, but what I will tell you, it is exciting because we get to see themes and trends. And I'll end on this, because when we think about impact investing, one of the things we are seeing is more organizations that are focused on the environment, but focused on the language of the environment across other issues. So how does the environment impact migration, right? How does the environment impact? So for example, we think about obviously global warming and the hurricanes that are happening. What is that going to mean for education and family movement from the southern Florida area? I'm just throwing that out there as an example. We can see this globally. It's linked to human rights issues. It's linked to, even in New York City, where people are located, the most economically vulnerable are in basement apartments that are in high flood territory, right? And so we think about these things and you see organizations that are really focused on environment as a value, but linked to the impact on the human condition, which I think is different than 20 years ago of how we talked about the environment. And I think that has a lot to do with the younger set of, as you said, the inheritors in some case and family offices of wealth who care deeply about environment, but want to see it really tangibly related to the human experience.
Yeah.
Right? That's the language that's different, I think, than 20 years ago.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Maria, you as a global Latina leader are especially we want to acknowledge during Hispanic Month, that you've broken many glass ceilings in your career yourself, in the fields of technology specifically. You also served in the Obama administration. You're leading innovation at LG as Director of Capital Partnerships for LG Nova. Can you tell us and talk to us a little bit about your investment strategy, your impact investment strategy specifically at LG Nova, and how you're thinking about your investments related to both education, technology, et cetera?
Sure. So it's great to be here today. Regarding LG, I'll probably go back a little bit to give a little more context. I wouldn't call myself kind of a traditional corporate animal. So I was recruited into LG's innovation program about 3 years ago. I was a White House Innovation Fellow before that, and a social entrepreneur before that, and I started my career at the UN. So it was a bit of a meandering path. Became very interested in impact investment as a social entrepreneur just because of the challenges of raising money as a female, especially 20 years ago, dating myself. But, and I joke, now we have an office in Sand Hill Row, and I joke that, I was rejected by every single venture capital outlet that has ever existed. I went back once and checked my email, and I've been rejected something like 600 times over a 6-year period. So, and I tell you that to give you a little context for maybe how I come to this conversation, because I'm a little bit radical in that I really believe these traditional financial structures, aren't working, haven't worked. We're at a very important moment of change. And because so many of you work in the education space, I think it's really important that you hear this. And Janet kind of touched on it we have a $70 trillion wealth transfer happening. It's the biggest wealth transfer in the history of the world. Financial services is changing, and education plays a huge role in that, and there's a convergence point between data and risk and why money doesn't flow. A lot of that's because of risk, and why money doesn't flow to diverse populations. There's a whole de-risking sort of part of financial services that educational institutions need to understand better, and they need to understand hybrid and blended capital and these new public-private partnership structures, and basically getting really innovative and creative in the capital space, finance, I would say catalytic capital. If you don't know these terms, Google them. We need more types of diverse people in financial services, because right now, those spaces, and I can speak from authority because even the Justice 40 people in the White House, which are the ones doing a lot of the innovations in the space, are definitely 1%ers, most of them, right? And the ones that are structuring the investments and doing, especially in the PE side, are, I don't want to say predominantly white men, but they are, that's just the reality. And sorry, I'll get to LG Nova. Sorry, I just had to start with all that so you kind of understand where I'm coming to this conversation from. So I became interested in sort of corporate venture capital as a way to scale diverse innovation. So this is where I came to the corporate space. And LG kind of aligned perfectly in that what I was noticing as a social entrepreneur, and then I ran programs for a time for the Hillary Clinton's NGO, Vital Voices, which is kind of a women's kind of focused NGO, and just realized that there was a lot of this patronizing, here's $50,000, I always joke, go become Elon Musk, with our $75,000 check. And I feel like there's a lot of that in the diverse capital space. And I wanted to see how do we sort of create real unicorns, real diverse unicorns, female unicorns. And when you're thinking about those things, like I said, you have to embrace alternative capital structures. And I would argue larger corporates, especially manufacturing corporates, like LG, because LG, before I was recruited by them, I didn't fully understand how they were sort of operating. But One of the major, LG is kind of interesting because they produce over 65% of all electric car parts, so they're a major player in climate. So if you care about climate, the Korean sort of large, the Asian large producers are very important. So LG in particular, 65% of all electric car parts, including Tesla, 85% of batteries, basically all chargers. Anything that's not Chinese is LG. And in particular, if you guys have followed the Biden administration, there's almost complete tariffs on anything Chinese and AI related, or sorry, EV related, which is electric cars. So LG becomes one of the most important actors in climate. Just kind of by, not by happenstance, but they don't really market themselves in that way, but they should. I guess that's why I'm talking about them. But so LG Nova is the innovation arm of LG Electronics, and we have a Grand Challenge program. I welcome you all. Google LG Nova, get your students. If you have any student sort of innovators or technologists, have them submit, their startup ideas or their startups. We create the new business lines of LG, so we work mostly in digital health, climate, and workforce AI. And I think we're doing really interesting work in kind of where health and wellness converge in the home. So we have a large project in West Virginia, a $700 million investment across Appalachia that we call the Appalachian Innovation Corridor, where we're doing really interesting things in sort of COPD, obesity, diabetes, chronic care management, and combining wellness and health. So if you think about diabetes and like what would actually help sort of a caregiver in the home, imagine having video of the refrigerator plus sort of, TV vitals and blood pressure and, how you could actually help a caregiver support someone with diabetes. That's a lot of the stuff that we're working on. So, really, really interested. Happy to be here. So
I think that's really fascinating. And I think that one of the things that's really fascinating that I'm taking away right away is the influence of the person in the role. And, when you get diverse thinkers and experts in key roles, like the ladies in this panel are in these key roles, you see capital flow differently because you have a perspective, you have experience, and you're making it happen, which I think is really interesting. Tell us, let's go back to Janet. We'll start with Janet again. In your impact investing strategy, we talked a little bit about your approach and all three of the panelists, their approach. If you could summarize one thing that you know that works and one thing that you know you're still solving for, what would you say those things were?
Thank you. One of the most unique element of impact investing is really about being patient. Right? So where I'm coming from as a philanthropy and as a foundation, and at the same time with the family office, 10 years is basically the benchmark when you talk about patient capital, right? So that's why I believe that there really is a perfect match when it comes to channeling this money or this funding into education. So I think this is something, I'm not downplaying VC because, of course, VC is very important, right? But
I'll downplay them.
Yes, exactly. But there is, again, like I said, in the context of funding education, right? And I'm focusing on that right now because this is the reason why we're here, and there really is a need for funding into education, capital, whether private or public. What works really well, like I said, is really being able to focus on the fact that as an investor, when you go into impact investing, and it depends which vehicles you're concentrated on. So in our case, other than education, we're really big into healthcare, innovation, specifically in Asia, is that that patient capital also comes with the people or the investors that owns this money, right? So, as investors, really it's important to have that mindset that you are not going to see ROI for 10 years. So even if that comes from your own family's money or private or your other friends pulling together as fellow investors, you have to realize that you're funding this specific project and you're not going to expect an ROI for the next 10 years. For a lot of investors, that's like a no-no, because like this is, they want to see a lot of times, 2 to 3 years turnaround, and that's it. I want my money back. So what works really well here, again, like I said, from this perspective, is mindset coming from an investor's side, right? It's that mindset that you are funding this project because you really want to make an impact. And whether or not you're after it for ROI, because of course, practically you want a return of your money, right? That's the way we make sure that the projects are sustainable. That's the way we make sure that our foundation's door remains open, so we can help, we can continue to help smaller NGOs and nonprofits that needs funding.
Yep.
So that's what works really well. And as far as what doesn't work, right? What doesn't work really is adhering to so many archaic practices. Like you both can relate to it, and that's why you're a radical when it comes to changing the landscape of funding. Unfortunately, whether from family office, really conservative ones that I'm fortunate to be dealing with also, and I respect them fully. The more conservative ones are the ones that clings to archaic principles of funneling their money or channeling the money, right? So it takes the new generation, and that's why, again, this is what's driving me so excited and positive when we talk about channeling that money, right? This new generation of inheritors, they have the right mindset. They're the ones that are telling their parents and their grandparents, listen, that's your old archaic way of investing our money or our family's money, but this is me now, and whether you like it or not, I'm going to inherit the money, and I will channel it to what I believe are the needs of the times, right? This is the need. We have to funnel, this much of millions or tens of millions of dollars into this very specific mental health project, and I'm going to do that, So, yeah.
That's the courageous part. That's the courage part, to redirect the capital in new and different ways based on the newer and upcoming generations, I think, realizing that the social impact investing is both fulfilling but also much needed.
Exactly. And we call it investing with the times.
Yeah.
So gone with the archaic, right? And this is how we do it now. We're investing with the times, whatever that is. But again, like I said, the most promising trend right now is the fact that the new generation has that really forward future mindset, of addressing really timely issues, like what I said, for us, when you talk about healthcare, it's the mental health issues. We're supporting a lot, we're funding a lot of initiatives when it comes to just, addressing these mental health issues amongst our younger generation. Yeah.
Thank you. Lisette, what about the fund for the City of New York?
Yeah, I also wanted to highlight that we all represent 3 different ways the way that capital is funding things. And I think that's important, right? Because when we think about funding, it's not one way of doing it. We're an independent nonprofit that raises funds as well as re-grants funds, right? Because I think that's a unique perspective. You have family offices as well, too. You have VCs. I think there's some interesting differences. And I say that because the capital landscape for how money gets funding to education is also really diverse and can be very confusing, right? So this is exciting. The one group we don't have here is government, and I will say that. So if we're looking at New York City, we track very much the funds that are going out of New York City. If you just look at New York City and think of the multiple billions of dollars in a budget, right? What you realize is that the single largest funder of after-school programs is the City of New York. And so that's actually really important to understand, because you have to say, how are those trends being guided? That's where a lot of the field is going to be going, particularly in after school. And then how do we support that as well, too, right? Because I think in some ways, too, there really is no single funder outside of government that's going to completely take up a space.
Right.
And do that in a sustained way. What that does mean is there's some limitations. Usually government money is highly restrictive. It takes longer to get. I'm just being honest about that. But it's also one that is, if you're in New York, not every city is the same, I'm just talking about New York. But if you are in New York, if you're in the education space, it's rare to be an education program that does not have government funding from the city. It is rare. So that just has a lot of levels of requirement. You made a point earlier about positionality, and I would say this. I'm a first-gen Puerto Riqueña here in New York, and one of the things that makes a huge difference for me is I've also gone through the public school system. I've also benefited from some of the most elite education. Like, you get to see both sides. It is fascinating. It's fascinating when you get to see a side that doesn't let you fail.
Yeah.
No such thing as failing in one side. I learned what high support looks like. No, it's fascinating. It is really interesting versus a side that is like, bootstraps. It's two different ways of thinking. I just want to say that, and I think about that because when we do look at education initiatives, I'm really curious about the kinds of supports that are there. So what are the things that I think I'm going to end on this, that I think are important in the portfolio that we see now? One is, and we're seeing some of this globally too, because I teach doctoral students in innovation, and education globally. In Singapore, for example, and no surprise, the AI discussion is about higher ed. It's AI in pre-K. How are we, right? It's not about higher ed, like, do we use it or not? It is not that. It's about saying, how do we think about gamification and learning, early childhood, alternatives to traditional kind of literacy? That is very real. That is normal. The government is backing it and supporting a rollout of that. And so we need to understand that the kinds of entrepreneurial energy from the nonprofit and for-profit sector is looking at 0 to 3. It's not just looking at higher ed. Is there warning signs there? Of course there are warning signs there, but there's also really exciting things that are happening with that. I think the second thing is that we're seeing a trend, and I think that's really important, is this idea of higher ed and workforce as being two distinct things. The collaboration is necessary. It's the business sector that owns a lot of the data on taxonomies of future jobs.
Yeah.
And not higher ed. And they don't have to share it. So how do you create a collaboration where you can share some of that data that matters? Because you better believe all of these companies know what's going to be available in the next 5 years or not. And that has a lot of implications for pieces. So I'll end with saying the role of negotiators, intermediaries, is going to be so important in the translation. And that's the beauty about being a first gen here. Like a first gen, we've had to translate.
Right.
So we're constantly translating across. She's translating across generations. She's translating across finance lines. I translate across finance lines and programs. That's the beauty of this role. And I would say for young folks who are coming into this, what people have said is not your asset, is actually your asset in a new space.
Yep, so interesting. And the comments about what's happening in other parts of the world, specifically related to AI, I can share that prior to coming here today, the last 3 days I spent at EdTech Week in New York City. New York City has a very vibrant EdTech community for education. I don't know if everyone knows that. Very vibrant, and the two hot topics of EdTech Week New York City were AI and the influence of AI on education as pre-K through higher ed, and entrepreneurships, externships. How do we get students more opportunity to experience workforce development through externships and internships and things of that nature? That was a very hot topic. And in terms of the AI, there was quite a bit of new startups that are being incubated here in New York, which I think is very interesting because one of the things that these startups are going to need is access to in situ educational opportunities, where the products that are being designed and developed and co-designed with students need to be, used in classes, in real classes with real students, to be able to be perfected and to be improved and to be iterated. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for investors that are looking for opportunities that I would consider many of these to be social impact opportunities as well, to steer the way AI would be integrated into education and teaching and learning. So very interesting that you brought that up as well. Maria, let's turn to you in terms of your impact investing. What are some things that you've learned that you know work? And what are some things that you think, and this, I'm sure it's going to be interesting with your radical perspective, what are some problems that you're still trying to solve for?
Sure. In terms of what's working, I'll try to spin it towards the education sector, just so it's maybe more relevant to you guys. I would say, in terms of the government, I would kind of parrot some of what was shared earlier around the importance, I think, of aligning with government capital. I can say even for us, with my investment holding, we have 2 partnerships with 2 different states in the hundreds of millions kind of range. And I think it's really important to think about, like, it's something called SSBCI money, if you're familiar with that. So that's the startup and sort of entrepreneurial allocations from the federal system. It's often funneled through universities. So if you're not aware of it, you should be. And it really positions universities in a very interesting space in innovation. So we have a fund with the UNLV in Nevada, from Nevada and federal funds that are funneled through the state of Nevada, which I think is all really interesting. I mean, this stuff wasn't happening even 5 years ago. So there's a lot of innovation in that space. I would also say, paying attention, as I went back before and talked about these creative capital structures, education is going to be the main beneficiary of that, right? So, and the reason I know that is because I got into this space trying to fund human rights workers, and I've had everyone and their mother tell me, we're not going to fund human rights workers, we're going to fund education. So I know this like really, really well. Where if you have an innovative bond structure, all the stuff that's happening with IRA, with CHIPS, all of these things, think of it as the new lottery. Right? If the lottery was funding education, the lottery is nothing compared to the trillions of dollars that are going into innovation and infrastructure, which are all types of impact investment. The main beneficiaries are going to be the education sector and health. Those are the 2 that governments are willing to fund. Like I said, I know because I was trying to get them to fund human rights and journalists, and they were like, no. So I know that that's what their emphasis is in, and this is in all of the impact bond space. So the bonds, like everything you know about bonds, it's all going to change. Like I said, add $70 trillion to all this. Millennials, don't trust banks, don't trust the current system. Millennials are going to control most of that capital. So, sorry. Yeah, I mean. All of it's going to change. And honestly, education, you guys are going to be the ones that can get the money if you're there to funnel it in the right place. And it's going to be about government because the governments are going to allocate it. So keep your eye on that, I would say. That's probably the most exciting thing in my mind in terms of what we're not doing well. And I would also say, this is on the education sector, is there are huge class-based issues that extend across all of these things. Because even, this might be a little bit controversial to say, but even in the BIPOC space, the African divide, I come from a Mexican background, there's a lot of divisions, Cuban versus Mexican, all of these things. What you see in the finance sector, it's very class-based on the BIPOC side. You see Africans, not African Americans. You see Cubans, not Mexicans. And a lot of that, can be handled and dealt with through the education sector, which I know you guys know that, because that's why you're here. But I think that's really important to keep in mind because these data sets are going to converge on the risk side with AI. And if we aren't all working collectively together, the data sets are going to get more sexist, more racist. The bonds are going to get more sexist, more racist. Like, we have to sort of set the table in the right way with the right structures and the right actors in order to ensure that those trends can be sort of addressed. And unfortunately, the status quo does not want those issues addressed. So there's going to be more and more class-based sort of elevation. So there really does need to be conscious mobilization and conscious education. And I can speak for myself. The only reason I get to work in this space at all is because of the intentionality of the people around the Obama administration in elevating me, who comes from a lower middle class environment, into an environment that is basically all 1%. So impact capital is controlled by the top 1%. And if you don't intentionally fight for it, you slide down, And in my case, as a female, I can say, it's extremely difficult to keep women and women of lower social classes in positions where you're structuring capital. And I keep coming back to PE, private equity, right? You guys have to have a foot in private equity. If you don't, all of the education ed tech companies that scale are funded by private equity, which are controlled by white men. And not white men from the middle classes. They are white men from, in some ways, New York City, that come from money, and it's not that they're bad, it's that they have a very different perspective. So anyway, I'll stop, but that, I think it's not something we can ignore because it's a very present reality,
So what's working well is innovation to some extent, rethinking. What's not working well is you still need the big foot in the door. And holding the door open, if not kicking the door open.
Yeah.
And so
if I could, I have one stat just to reinforce this, just so you guys see. So I have 4 funds that are run under my holding I have 2 other partners, and we have 110 million from LG. So we've run 5,000 startup through our pipeline, right? Which includes sort of the LG Grand Challenges. We have a pretty good track record on BIPOC, about 40%. That sort of ended up being commercially accelerated through these other corporates and sort of growing. On women, it's really important. So I'm obviously a woman. My partner is African, from Africa, not African American, and we have one front-facing female that ever got through the system, and we're allies. That means one person out of 5,000 got through our investment committees. We have women that were founders that weren't pitching. Right, so we have a 30%, but those were hidden women, right? So basically that means who we were able to scale through the government and through private sector, 1 out of 5,000. I can't even imagine, that's a white woman. I can't even imagine a woman of color. The odds would be very low, and that's with, we're pretty strategic and anyway, I don't go on and on, but
right.
but the struggle is real. It's absolutely real, and we need more women on investment committees. We need more women in finance. We need more women controlling capital and structuring investments, and we need more women of color doing those things. Whenever a younger black female comes to me and says wants advice on career, I'm start a fund, run a fund. It's going to be hell, but the future of the world. We need women running capital and structuring investments. So anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to add something too, and I think because we're very clear about in the finance space how few there are of women of color. The assumption is in the nonprofit space that's not the case. When I said 1 in 6 employed, less than 4% of executives in the nonprofit space are Latinas. And then it becomes a quarter of that number, less than 1%, that manage a $300 million budget that I manage. I just want to put that in perspective too, that when we're talking about these numbers of representation, we sometimes feel a sense that they're well represented in other sectors. They're not.
Yeah.
The entrepreneurship and the ideas need to be represented here, across these sectors, in the ideas, in philanthropy, in managing home offices. And all of those have severe underrepresentation of women of color.
Right. And so that brings you to the very clear call to action is not only if you're in a position to move capital, we need you to move capital in some of these areas where it's most directly going to impact the underserved, especially in education. And also in related, if you're in a position to hire, make that extra effort to hire underserved or minority candidates that are that can bring a new perspective and bring a diverse perspective and bring a new way of thinking potentially into the opportunity. And so with that, I do want to leave a couple of minutes for questions because I think we've got such a talented panel, and I want we've got a diverse audience too of both students and practicing professionals and higher education administrators. Does the comments bring up questions for anyone in the room? We'll take 5 minutes for a couple of questions. Yes, Lynn.
Maria, when you talked about, you've all talked about the sense of urgency, right, around placing people into significant positions of influence in managing capital. I have to tell you, I wouldn't know how to start being that person who either knew the levers to encourage others to do it or perhaps do it myself. Help us understand how to translate your sense of urgency into what people in this room can actually start to do to create a different face, if you will, to the worlds that you occupy.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful question. And obviously, I think all the panel, it would be great to hear their thoughts too. I would start with, in your finance degrees and your programs in capital at the universities, just make sure you're not too old school. Like when Janet talked about these old archetypes and these old structures, they really are starting to fade. You know, those programs need to account for that, and make sure you have women. Like, what I see happening in finance, or that needs to happen in finance, is kind of what happened in STEM education 10 years ago. Right? Like trying to understand, like, well, why are women feeling excluded from the robotics team? And why are women feeling excluded from physics? There needs to be a conversation of why are women feeling excluded from the finance, class? And why aren't they feeling empowered that they can do these things? And I can tell you it's because, there is a lot of sort of, you might say sort of momentum within the status quo to prevent women from being involved in these things. I mean, I can say that very directly. I mean, even in my own, I have my name on the stationery. People still try to knock me out of meetings every other day. I swear to God, if I didn't have a partner who was male, who was actively pushing me back into meetings, I get kicked out of meetings with funders that I brought in. I mean, it's kind of hilarious, but I mean, it happens all the time. So I think we have to figure out how to make women more comfortable leaning in, make men more comfortable with women leaning in. It can be very psychological, and get women comfortable with structuring investments, with running investments. So I do think it starts at an educational level,
Can I add something?
Yes.
Thanks, Alison. So, no, I just wanted to, before I forget it, because I tend to forget things a lot of times. There's so many gazillion things going on in my head. So, and absorbing, all the learnings that I can right now too. But just, I wanted to really put a call to action out there in this room specifically. I know there's quite a few of us who are investors, who are, fund managers, who comes from family offices and philanthropies and foundations, etc. Our sponsors, you're here today. So from where we operate, a lot of times, it has something to do really, and this is my own also core, is when, as a leader, it's important that we humanize our decision making, right? So as investors, it's not just looking at numbers, right? So it's not just, the millions of dollars, and it's not just looking at how many students will this benefit or how many people will it benefit. But the most important thing is that seeing the human aspect of that project and seeing the human aspect of your investment. You mentioned earlier, Lynette, as far as the context of, yes, we talk about climate change as an example, but taking that further into a much more kind of crystallized context is that how does climate change affect people, in New York that are, for example, not as privileged to be living uptown or Upper East Side, but really at the, underserved communities. So this is my call to action to every one of you, and also for our younger generation, our students who are here right now, because you are our future. You're going to be carrying these torches that we have right now. So, yeah, think about it. You know, when you become decision makers yourselves, and even right now, when you decide amongst your peers at school, at your classrooms, or little things that you do as, you know, student leaders, or big things that you do, you know, always remember to look at the human aspect of every decision that you make, because that's what's going to make the difference. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how many connections or resources you have. The most important thing is seeing any project that you do, any investment that you do, seeing that from a human aspect, perspective. And then you get to also realize, you know, that even making a change for just one person means so much. That's my call to action.
Yeah. Hi. My call to action is that, particularly when we think about the youngest folks in this room, is that they see a credible opportunity in entrepreneurship in the way other generations have not. That is very real. Everybody wants to be their own boss. There's nothing wrong with that. What I love about that is that means there's a higher risk tolerance, which means we'll see that both in the private and the nonprofit sector. So when I talk about entrepreneurs, these may be folks who have ideas, who want to build something as change makers now, that need intermediaries to support them to do that. And I say that because by the time someone comes into a college, we already see that they've had 2 or 3 side hustles. It's fascinating. And they've all been online, all right? And so irrespective of class, which I think is interesting too. So this idea of what does it mean to be a digital native? How do we see that as linked to entrepreneurship? The young folks in here could teach a lot of us things, but what I want to say is that I think it's important that we acknowledge that they have as much contribution in the social sector as far as problem solving that requires the same kind of acumen in raising funds and going through breaking barriers. And so I'll end with this. The Fund for the City of New York offers paid internships every summer. And I say that. And we get people from around the world and even remote because we think it's important for you, if you do have that level of entrepreneurship and care about making change, you should see it. So I want to end on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the panel. Thank you for your time. I'll hand it back over to Carol.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you.
And I'll just say that we're going to take a little 5-minute break right now. The women's restrooms on the other side of the elevators, but also I want to invite, just this panel, if they want to step over there for questions. They're going to set the table for lunch right now, and then we're in for a really big treat. We're doing a fireside chat with Liz, but I want to also tell you a couple other things. Derek Watchman wasn't here. He got COVID. He's on our board. He is chair of the board of the RES. It's 6,500 Native American businesses. He's a tremendous leader. Many of you met him if you were there in June. So he is very sorry that he was not able to fly from Phoenix to be here. He got COVID. And then Pierre Theodore had a conflict, and he will be here this afternoon. So I know he's looking forward to meeting all of you. So at the reception this afternoon, Dr. Pierre Theodore is with Genentech. We met him through Maria. She's been a great longtime partner, introducing us to a lot of people that we didn't know, who have now become part of our health equity team and also our innovation equity team. So with that, maybe you guys can exit over there and receive some questions, and we'll take a 5-minute break as they set our salads and get us ready for lunch. And looking forward to the afternoon with you all.